Thank you, Reverend. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me here. Firstly, to everyone, I'm really sorry. I know I was supposed to do it at 5 o'clock. Today, we had a day-long meeting with some Telangana government officials and transgender community, and which went on longer than I expected. So, couldn't make it on time. My apologies for that. Uh, before I get into talking about Buddhism and its scope of sexuality, of human sexuality. I'll just do a small prayer and then we can begin with that, I think. Uh, the prayer is going to be in Tibetan. I'll also tell you what it means once I'm done with it. Uh, and you can also certainly, try and calm your minds and also uh, bring into whatever the faith you are in, bring in that faith into your heart and mind and, reflect and join me in this prayer. Might be a strange language, but nonetheless, I think prayer doesn't have really different languages. I think all prayers are in that sense carry the energy of healing and supposedly at least should have the aspect of inclusivity and uh, addressing the larger human problems and concerns in all practicality. So yeah. Sangi chodang shoki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinso gipe sonam gi drola benchet sangi drupar shog. Sangi chodang shoki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinso gipe sonam gi drola benchet sangi drupar shog. Sangi chodang shoki chognam la jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinso gipe sonam gi drola benchet sangi drupar shog. Semche tamche deva dang de vegyu dang den pagyo chek. Semche tamche dugnel dang dognel gegyo dang delwa gyo chek. Semche tamche dugnel me pe deva dang mi delwa gyo chek. Semche tamche nirik chak dang ni dang delwe tang nyom lane pagyo che. Gusum gupe gone chak salo no sham ye chitranchal malo bul tagme ne shak dikto tamche shak kepa geva namla jayirang korwa matang bardu legjune dola choki korlo korwa dang dagjin ginam jang chup chen pog no. So the first prayer generally is taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, which are the three jewels in the Buddhist belief and faith. Same as Christianity has Holy Spirit and Holy Father and Holy Son. What we have, the three aspects that we rely on or take refuge in is Buddha. In this point in time, it is the Buddha Shakyamuni, and then the Dhamma, which is the teachings of the Buddha, and the Sangha are the people and the community that upholds this Dhamma, practices and teaches and keeps it alive. So these are the three, what we call them as three jewels or three ratnas, is what we seek refuge in. And the second one is what we call as four immeasurables. The second prayer talks about the commonality that we all have with all other sentient beings. When I say sentient beings, any being that has basically mind, the aspect of mind as how Buddhism describes it. So the second prayer basically goes as this. May all sentient beings have happiness and causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from happiness, that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. These are the four immeasurables that are reminded for our own practice, and also to recognize that this is something we desire to be happy and desire to be free of suffering is something that is common among all beings. There is no being in the universe that would want suffering, and there's also no being that would say no to happiness. So that is a commonality that we establish before we practice any of the Dhamma. So the point is also because in the first prayer, the refuge seeking is not only for our sake. The idea is that we seek refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, so that we also practice and we also realize our own what we call as Buddha nature, so that we become a Buddha ourselves, and not for our own sake. Again, to be very specific, to become a Buddha or to be enlightened is not for our own sake. We aspire to do that so that we can become absolutely skillful and able to help other beings to become free of suffering completely. So that's in both the prayers, as much as it is about my practice, it is also the emphasizing that my practice, in all its entirety is not complete unless there are other people are involved in it. There are other beings are considered in it. Sonal has to go. I think she just sent a message. Hey, Sonal, thanks for always, you're inspiring and moving always to hear you out, and good to see you here and hopefully in person sometime. Please take care. Yeah. Uh, yeah, coming back. So the practice, the entire aspect of practice is that it needs to include all other sentient beings, all other living beings into it. It can't be devoid of them. So why am I emphasizing on that point is to say that I think this is something which is also very common to every other faith, whether it is Christianity or Hinduism or Sikhism, Baha'i or any other faith. Uh, any faith practice is incomplete if it doesn't include other beings and other people as into part of that practice. It is not just for our sake. Then the prayer and the practice becomes nothing but a selfish, ego-fulfilling, prideful aspect. It doesn't really fulfill the purpose of a really faithful practice. It's rather self-defeating, I guess. So Buddhism also in that sense emphasizes how all our practice is for other sentient beings, not for our sake, not for our own sake. So just to that means it includes people of all other sexualities, people of all other gender identities, people that we disagree with, people we like, beings we don't like, people that make us angry or people who have hurt us. All beings are included in our prayer and practice, I think. And I don't think that's an exception in this is an exception in any other faith and religion, honestly, of whatever little I know of them. So having said that, I'll dwell into introduce you to little bit about what Buddhism, how Buddhism looks at human sexuality as such. It's kind of difficult, to be honest, because I'm not sure how much of you all really do know about Buddhism, right? So because if for you to understand what entails or why what Buddhism thinks about human sexuality or why it thinks so, one also need to know certain basics of Buddhism, I think. But in this given point of time, I can't really fit that in. But I'll try and address wherever possible and try not to leave in any loopholes as much as possible. So Buddhism, as I said, it is Buddha Shakyamuni is the teacher and the founder of Buddhist religion in this time and era, and it is practiced in different countries across the world. Largely in the beginning, they were practiced historically speaking, China, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, mostly Southeast Asian countries. But later, of course, Buddhism has spread across to many other countries due to trade by all of them, because of King Ashoka or some other emissaries or other kings who were interested in Buddhism themselves made Buddhism to go to other countries around. So as I said, Buddha is the founder. Remember, the significance is that Buddha is not a god. We do not treat him as a god. Of course, we make prayers, we pay respects, we make offerings. There are altars where Buddha is, and Buddha statue and images are there on altars with offerings and prayers and all that. But Buddha is not a god. Buddha is a teacher and is considered to be a teacher of both humans, gods, and all other beings. And the teachings that he gave is Dhamma. Remember, the Dhamma that Buddha gave is not a Dhamma that Buddha by some kind of magic came across it or invented it by himself or discovered it. Nothing like that. Buddha, whatever Dhamma he taught is out of his own realization, out of his own experience, out of his own practice, what he realized about human condition, human suffering, and the nature of reality. These are the things that Buddha talks about in his vast amount of teachings. And also Buddhism doesn't have any particular book. There's no one single book that goes as a scripture of the entire Buddhist faith. Rather, there are many books. On a basic level to say, Buddha's teachings are divided into 84,000 sutras. So each sutra is a text in itself. So one can say there are possibly 84,000 texts, which I'm sure is not possible to read in my lifetime. And probably most of the people's lifetime too. But so there's no one text to rely on. One can rely on a combination of them or any one of them, depending on their own level and state of practice. And also when I say Buddha did not discover them and invent them, it means that Buddha is not the ultimate authority on them. To recognize that it is not the word of Buddha that is the ultimate authority. Buddha has introduced us to these things, and it is up to us up to people who believe in Buddhism and want to practice Buddhism, is up to them to investigate, to study, to learn, to investigate, and then practice. If this fits into the rational, logical investigation, then you practice and you apply them in one's daily life. So that's the aspect of Dhamma. And the rest of the Sangha, who practice, who are the monks and the nuns, and also lay Buddhists who are not monks and nuns, they practice Buddhism, and this is the Sangha. This is the fourfold Sangha, which is called Buddhist women, monastics, monks and nuns, and lay women and laymen. So these are the Sangha that practices it, because Dhamma is only kept alive when people practice it. So the belief is Dhamma is not alive in texts or in temples or in monasteries or in scriptures and conversations and intellect and all that, but it is only alive when it is practiced. So it is the Sangha that actually practices Dharma, keeps it alive, and actually passes it on from generation to generation. So these are the certain basic things to keep in mind while I go into rest of the aspect of sexuality and Buddhism. So to begin with, like many other religions, Buddhism also does have certain enunciated views about homosexuality. It's not always plain, simple, and clear. There is no one single stance that says that homosexuality is a transgression or a deviancy or anything as such. But there are many narratives and many, depending on the context and time and the teachers, there are different narratives that have came across. Many scholars still continue to, not many actually, very few scholars continue to study sexuality within the aspect of Buddhist faith, mostly queer people actually, not anyone else otherwise, not at this point at least. So the point, there are different traditions in Buddhism, like I said, that it is practiced across different countries. So different countries have different traditions. So largely, let's say there are two major traditions within Buddhist, larger Buddhist picture. One is the Mahayana Buddhism, which is from China, Japan, Vietnam, Tibet, these places, and also a bit part in India, and Bhutan also for that matter. And there is another lineage or another tradition, what we call as Pali tradition, or what we call as Theravada, which is in Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Burma, and Bangladesh, and other Southeast Asian countries. So these are the two traditions, but also within these traditions, Theravada, there is only one, is the only existing tradition in its lineage. But in Mahayana, there are many other traditions. Under Mahayana, there is Tibetan Mahayana, Chinese and Japanese, Zen, Pure Land Buddhism, Nichiren Buddhism. There's a variance of Buddhist traditions. The point is to recognize that all these faiths and traditions are founded on Buddha's teachings, but their philosophical emphasis is different, and their practice emphasis is different from each tradition. And that's what makes them different, not the teachings itself, but what they emphasize. Some emphasize on meditation, some emphasize on a different kind and techniques of meditation, some emphasize on studying, some emphasize on meditation alone, some emphasize on both practice of meditation and studying, and as a combination. So that is what makes them different traditions, but not the teachings itself. But nonetheless, because in course of history, all these traditions did have seen different teachers, there were different commentaries on the teachings. So that also means there are different aspects or different perspectives and point of views on sexuality as well. So on the basic level, to begin with, one need to also recognize the point is that as in many other traditions, many other faiths and many other religions, the debate or the dialogue is not about homosexuality versus heterosexuality. Like most traditions seem to believe that, most religions believe that heterosexuality is acceptable, okay, and good, and homosexuality is not. But in Buddhism, that has hardly ever been the argument. The argument is whether sexuality or the practice of sex itself is okay or not, and the practice of celibacy. These are the two opposition point of views. The oppositions were not between, or the counters were not between homosexuality and heterosexuality, but it is between the sexuality itself and the practice of celibacy. So in Buddhism, largely most of the faith believes in celibacy being the requirement for higher spiritual attainments and gains and practices, and sexuality seems to be a hindrance. The practice of sex seems to be a hindrance. And that's where sexuality has been looked down upon. But nonetheless, interestingly, if you look at it, although there is a critique on sexual desire itself or the sexual act itself, because the householder is considered as the someone who conquers the world, and the monastic is someone who is considered as someone who renounces the world. So there's a world renouncer and there's a world conqueror who is in a materialistic world along with sexual desire and everything, and hence that person cannot, is not easy, not impossible, but not easy to have spiritual attainments. Whereas the world renouncer, who is a monastic, is much more conducive to practice and to attain, to progress forward on the path to become a Buddha. But in this very interesting aspect, in spite of having this debate around sexuality versus celibacy, Buddhist tradition has always been also very, easygoing or liberal when it comes to desire of sexual expression among laity, not monastics, but among lay people. It has been much more liberal in that sense, because both in Tibetan and Sinhalese Buddhism, one can actually look at it and see that how they are much more, non-judgmental about premarital sexual affairs or sex work, for that matter. These were not really looked down upon, honestly. For that matter, even in Tibetan tradition, if you look, there are actually some of the greatest teachers were actually sex workers. So it opens a different ball game altogether. But in the oral commentaries of certain teachings, so the Dhamma is a vast canon. One is, of course, the 84,000 Buddha's texts, but of that 84,000 texts, in course of last 2,600 years, many people have given many commentaries on Buddha's teachings, on all those 84,000 teachings. So that also includes and becomes part of Dhamma. In that sense, the oral commentaries do not really consider homosexuality as a transgression in entirety. But yes, there are times and mentionings around 14th and 15th and 16th century times where homosexuality is considered as a transgression or a sexual misconduct, to put in the language of the monastic code what we have. But before I get a little more into what one can make out of those mentionings, to quickly look into it in the three different major cultures of Buddhism, which is one is homosexuality in India. If you look at, they were really not treated any different than heterosexual acts. They were not really degraded compared to heterosexual acts. And for example, if you look into Jataka tales, there's Buddha and Ananda, who were in their previous lives were two male deer animals who were in love with each other. And there were two men who were, in Jataka tales also, there were two men who were in so much love with each other, they don't want to marry so that they can live with each other for the rest of their life. And in one story, there is a Naga king who is in love with Ananda, who is Buddha's disciple or immediate attendant. So there are different mentioning of homosexual, romance, eroticism, and love, and all kinds of possibilities. So most scholars actually say that the argument about homosexuality doesn't come from the mentioning or the not, but not mentioning. So it comes from the silence about it, but not from the actual writings about it, in honesty. If you look in China, for that matter, moving on from India to China, both Confucianism and Taoism are actually basically neutral to love among same-sex people or romance or sex among same-sex people. Emperors are, historically known to have male lovers, and in classical China time, historical period, it was quite agreeable and acceptable. And then there is it's a neutral stand in Chinese Buddhism in that sense. In Japanese Buddhism, whereas it's not just a neutral stand, they go on to actually celebrate the sexual pleasure between two men as a great, mysterious aspect. So these are, looking at China, Japan, and India, there's mentionings of it, but different stands at different levels when it comes about human homosexuality or other sexualities, for that matter. When it comes to lesbianism and lesbian context and lesbian sexuality, although most of the mentionings do ignore about lesbian women. For example, there is this Chinese play by Li Yun in the 16th, 17th century time, which concerning it's a lesbian love story, right? And this was a popular play around that time, and it was quite common. But nonetheless, other than few mentionings, lesbian sexuality narrative is more or less ignored in the Buddhist context. Could be because of the patriarchal aspect of Buddhism itself, or because having it been led by mostly men and not very few women had played an important role in that sense. Mostly men were the one dominant, like many other religions in that sense. So these are roughly to think about, sexuality in different Buddhist cultures. human sexuality in Buddhist cultures. Like I mentioned, in the 16th and 17th century, you see the mentionings of homosexuality being a transgression or sexual deviancy or sexual misconduct. So where do we stand about it today? Like I said, Buddha is not the ultimate authority of Dhamma. Buddha introduced Dhamma, Buddha taught Dhamma, but he's not the ultimate authority. So one cannot say the logic of, or the statement of saying that Buddha said so, or the scripture says so, or the teacher says so, Lama says so, doesn't work in Buddhist, diaspora. The point, because it is just not enough. The entire practice should rely on logic and rational. So whatever comes across, whatever one finds across, if it fits into the rational, logical understanding, if it can be proven rationally, logically, only then it is agreeable. Just Buddha said doesn't mean it need to be agreed immediately. So Buddha himself said on many occasions that do not take my teachings on my face value. Do investigate, do analyze, do question and challenge before actually arriving and believe whether accepting whether they're true or not. That is applicable even today, and that's how the practice and the study is done even today. Whether in any other tradition that you seek, it is just not believed because Buddha said so. So having said that, the 16th and 17th century considerations of homosexuality being a sexual deviancy, in around 1990s, I think, if I'm not wrong, His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama in US did have his series of discussions with a queer community over there, in which His Holiness said that the writings were of that time and era and were fitting to that context and scenario, but not at this point of time, and they need not to be taken as they were said in 16th and 17th century. And that continues to be so. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean that Buddhism is completely okay with it. The mainstream Buddhism still needs a long way to go to be completely, absolutely queer inclusive and transgender inclusive and all that. But it is going to take time, and that there needs to be more effort. But nonetheless, the point is that there is a larger scope for conversation and debate within the lay community, and also as well as the larger scholarly and the Buddhist monastic community about sexuality and gender identities. Having said all that, I know I've almost crossed my time. So if there are any questions, please ask. I'll be happy to answer. And then I can end towards the end with a small prayer.
Yeah, any questions, please? Any questions?
Either you got all what I said, or probably I left you more confused than you were before I spoke.
Hello,
Any
sir.
questions?
Hello,
Yes, Father.
It's quite interesting to know that even if it is said by Buddha, it is not authoritative, only if it is logic and reasonable. And that's quite exciting to know that, though I have tried to learn a little about the Buddhist religion and other religious traditions, but this is for the first time that I hear that the authority is not on a particular person or on a particular text, but on the context and reason and logic. Thank you for that new information that is for me.
You're welcome, Father.
Just a comment, yeah.
Anyone else also want to have any comments? Please go ahead.
May I?
Yes, Andrew. Yeah.
Thank you, Tashi, for that wonderful session. We had done Ambedkar's Buddha and his Dhamma this year. And the fact that you mentioned that Buddha doesn't, or Buddha might not be the final authority in explaining what one can experience by himself or herself or theirself, would Buddha and his Dhamma be an example of a perceptive understanding of what Buddhism can be? Because and in that same line of thought, could a different could an understanding be different for a person who is from the LGBTQ community, and does that encourage a person from the LGBTQ community to have their own understanding also? So I was trying to draw a parallel there.
Okay. So
wait a minute. Any other questions you have? Any other questions? Okay. If not, actually go ahead answering to.
Sure. Hey, thank you, Andrew, for that question. Buddha and Dhamma, yeah, I read it. It's like many other writings that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Baba Saheb Ambedkar did, is one of the very powerful writings. Although many of us would wish that he would lived longer after that to be able to write more on Buddhism.
That's true. That's true. It was posthumous. It was a posthumous writing,
it was
right?
published posthumously, and also his writings were largely before this. He did write a little bit on Karl Marx and Buddha. He also did write in a couple of articles in Mahabodhi Journal, I think, of Sri Lankan Mahabodhi Society. Those were the only writings I could find, but there's not much. But knowing Ambedkar, he generally do write a lot on anything that he picks up. He wouldn't live with one book for sure. But unfortunately, this was not the case in case of Buddhism. So yes, Buddhism, Ambedkar and Buddha does provide a great insight and a very different alternative perspective in Buddhism for that matter. But nonetheless, one also need to recognize that Ambedkar introduces his Buddha and Dhamma through a new perspective, what he calls Navayana perspective. He does not pick up either Mahayana or Theravada as both the existing traditions. He does not consider any of them because there are certain things that Buddha were not okay with. For example, both the traditions believe in karma, believe in past lives and future lives, Mahayana and Theravada. It's one of the core beliefs in the entire any Buddhist tradition across the globe. Pick up anything, it's important. But Ambedkar did have a difficulty with getting in terms with it because the very notion of future and past lives is the notion of the aspect or the concept is used on also Dalit people by Hindus for as long as we remember, I think. As long as the history goes. So in that sense, he kind of contested that idea. He limited the aspect of karma to one lifetime, which is not the larger Buddhist belief of the other traditions of the Buddhist belief. That sense, there would be little contradictions between Buddha and Dhamma and the rest of the other Buddhist traditions. So let's say the Navayana do have certain contradictions with Mahayana and Theravada and other traditions in that sense. But nonetheless, like I said, it does present a lot of greater perspective. Even at that point, there are times when in the Buddha and Dhamma, Ambedkar questions not only Buddha, but he also questions Dhamma also. He also questions the scriptures also, because scriptures also are not everything. So it's more experiential in nature. The religion, the faith itself, the practice itself is very experiential in nature. It is not very scriptural in nature. But nonetheless, I'm not saying that scriptures are useless or hopeless or can be disregarded completely, because scriptures do provide guidelines, and also they're organized in a certain way in last 2,600 years. They also provide a large scope to question and debate and actually figure out things for people for themselves. And also, most of the scriptures do come with sound logic and rationality. They don't really present it just out of whim or fancies of someone believed so or someone said so. But there's an entire, for example, if you take someone like Chandrakirti or Dignaka, the Buddhist scholars, they have written texts and texts like really a great volume of text on logic itself, not on anything else, not Buddha's teachings alone, but on the very aspect and the concept of logic. They have written a multitude of texts that emphasizes how important logic is to kind of engage with any other Buddhist aspects. Yes, like you said, that also leaves a lot of scope for people to actually be much more receptive about Buddhism, because they don't need to be shunned away by what teachers say or scriptures say, because they can think about it themselves. They read because there's so much is available already, and so many teachings are available, and analyze and actually see if it makes sense to them. And that's why I think there are much more queer people who are open and out in Buddhist spaces than any other religious spaces, I think, for that matter. Whether you go all the way west in US or but interestingly, this is not the case within the native Buddhist communities, because there are also other cultural aspects that come in, I think, within Tibetan native Buddhist community and or the Sinhala or Theravada Buddhist communities. Being open and about sexuality and gender identity is not that easy because of other cultural notions. But Buddhism alone gives a larger scope for queer people to explore their sexuality and gender identity, and also to have a bigger dialogue between their faith and the queerness that they embodied. Yeah. I'm not sure if I answer you clearly, but that's all I can come up with, I think, at this point.